Okay, Jimmy Carter, it's your turn to face a big decision. You are President of the United States, it's 1979, and you have received a request that is going to compel you to make a choice between humanitarianism, what's good for an individual, and possibly the national interest, what's good for the United States. Here's the setup. During your presidency, the Shah of Iran, a longtime ally of the United States, has come under attack from revolutionary groups within Iran. You have been concerned that the United States has gotten too deeply involved in other countries' revolutions for some while, and you have concluded, as the first president to be elected after America's defeat in Vietnam, that the United States should not get that deeply enmeshed in other countries' affairs. So you watch the revolution rising in Iran, and you conclude that despite the fact that the Shah has been an American ally since the early 1950s, that the Shah in fact was installed or reinstalled on his throne, courtesy of the CIA under Dwight Eisenhower, that you need to just sort of let this change play out. And it does. The Shah is overthrown. He is driven from power by groups who proclaim an Islamic revolution in Iran. The Shah was a secular ruling leader, and the Islamic fundamentalists in Iran don't like that at all. And they also don't like the fact that the Shah was an ally of the United States, a stooge of the United States, they would often claim. And so the Shah is pushed out of Iran. He goes into exile, and he's kind of wandering the world for a while until, well, the report you get is that he is deathly ill, that he is dying, and that the only healthcare that can save him is available only in the United States. So here's the deal. You've got this request to allow the Shah to come to the United States, to come to New York, to get medical treatment. You're warned, however, that if the Shah comes to the United States, it's going to inflame suspicions in Iran that the United States is once more conspiring against the interests of the Iranian people. The Shah in 1953 had been forced out of Iran, but then he regrouped and with the help of the United States was reinstalled. So the Shah now, 26 years later, is, well, in the minds of the Islamic radicals in Iran, the United States is going to be up to exactly the same thing. So there might very well be trouble for the United States. I should add that the revolutionaries in Iran make no bones about the fact that they consider the United States to be the great Satan. This is the enemy of Islam, the enemy of Iran, the enemy of the Islamic Revolution. So, Mr. President, this is your choice. You have to decide, here is this guy, the Shah, who has been a partner, an ally of the United States for a quarter of a century. He's often been a difficult kind of ally, but nonetheless, he has sided with the United States. And now, in his moment of greatest personal need, he's asking a favor. But you know that if you grant this favor, it will be interpreted in Iran as if the United States is once again conspiring against Iran. So, Jimmy Carter, what do you do? I should add, and maybe this plays into it or not, that Jimmy Carter is the most overtly religious president this country has had in the last 60 years or so. Jimmy Carter was a Sunday school teacher, and he was publicly proclaimed born-again Christian. So religion is really important to Jimmy Carter, and he certainly seems to be somebody who takes his religion very seriously, and it's not just for show. So Carter, as a Christian, believes that Christians have this sort of Christian duty to do well by people when they can. So throw this into the mix. You're President of the United States. but you are a very devout Christian as well, and you believe that it is Christians' duty, when they can, to come to the aid of their fellow humans. So, there you are, Jimmy Carter. What do you do? Well, he thinks it over. He asks himself, are the reports that the Shah is on the brink of death, are they true? Are they accurate? Is there some exaggeration going on here? And you don't know for sure, because you're getting it from the Shah's entourage. And you know perfectly well that you're not going to assist the Shah to get back on his throne in Iran. So maybe he's not about to die. But on the other hand, you don't know that he's not. And, to put it mildly, you would feel badly if you said no and a week later he dies of something that might have been, if not cured, at least alleviated by access to the top medical care in New York. So I'll tell you what Jimmy Carter did. Jimmy Carter said, okay, let the Shah in. And he made very clear that the United States was not going to interfere in Iranian affairs. But people in Iran didn't believe it, or at least they professed not to believe it. And not long after the Shah was admitted to the United States, radicals in Iran stormed the American embassy in Tehran and took several dozen Americans captive, took them hostage. And they held these hostages. Eventually, they let some of them go, but eventually, somewhat more than 50 hostages. They held them hostage for over a year. Now, you, President Carter, you obviously felt a great responsibility for the Americans simply because they're Americans, but a double responsibility from the fact that it was your decision that triggered the takeover, the kidnapping of these Americans. Now, some of your advisors told you, and you probably had reason to think this yourself, that maybe allowing the Shah into the United States was not really the cause of the takeover of the American embassy and the seizure of the American hostages. Maybe it was simply an excuse. And in fact, it is true. It was thought perhaps to be true at the time that what was going on in Tehran with the American hostages was as much a power struggle among different groups of radicals in Tehran as it was a statement against the United States. Nonetheless, you feel responsible in at least a couple of ways. And you decide that it is going to be your principal chore, your principal responsibility to free the hostages until, the hostages are freed. As a result of this, though, the Iranians realize, okay, boy, we've got this American president exactly where we want him. They're not about to release the hostages because you're basically paralyzed. You're at their mercy. And in fact, you become kind of a prisoner of your own White House and of your own policy because you said you're not going to leave the White House for any period of time. You're not going to be distracted by anything else until the hostages are free. So the hostages remain. And you're running for re-election in 1980, and the fact that Americans are being held hostage in Iran is pointed out by your rival, by your opponent, Ronald Reagan, as evidence of your weakness as an American leader. Well, you wind up losing the election. There were other contributors, but this certainly didn't help things. And after you left office, in fact, as you were leaving office on the very day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated in 1981, at the beginning of 1981, the American hostages were released. So this was the deal. You had a choice. You took the humanitarian course as opposed to the national interest course, and there were these dire consequences. It may well have cost you the presidency, or it certainly contributed to that. So you make your decisions and you live with the consequences.